Because I Love You, written by Paul Stefani and narrated by Miss Creepy Tales. Though only a couple centuries had passed, it feels like a lifetime ago. I was only 8 when my mother took me away from my home in Ireland. My father worked hard at the docks unloading fish throughout the day, always thinking of it, and my mother, being a conservative woman, rarely complained. I think it may have been an offense to her deep down, a wound that festered over the years, finally bubbling to the surface, making itself known in all its fetid glory. My father was the same, holding in all his emotions until they boiled over. I would probably be lying if I said I didn't deserve it, but if I was foolish enough to cross his path while he was deep in the jug, I would usually end up with a pretty good shiner. As I stated, it wasn't me who set the wheels into motion. I swear, my mother goaded the man on purpose, and the beatings on her was as regular as you like. Her usual complaint would be his drinking. I didn't see anything wrong with it myself as a boy, and over the years, I can see the desire to escape the troubles of life, if for a little while. I can't remember it so well anymore, but I do recall the wooden mug exploding against the wall, having just missed my mother's head. She had been going off on him again as soon as he came through the door about wasting good coin on that poison. I used to get so angry, yelling at her in my head as to why she would be stupid enough to instigate him. That night was different, however. That night he beat her, every color but flesh, and I just sat myself in the kitchen corner, praying to God and all the saints listening that it would end soon. And after a bit, it did. I worked up enough courage to tiptoe to my bedroom, making my way carefully around broken furniture. My poor mother was a sight, having crawled her bloody mess of a self underneath the table. I had almost made it too, until I stumbled over a busted stool. He turned his head and I swear the fires of hell burned in them eyes. I can't recall what he said, but in seconds, he was on top of me, smacking me around. I begged him to stop, and I cried so loud I didn't even hear the fire poker knock him in the head. I just remember that it did stop, and a great weight fell on top of me, threatening to push the very life out of my lungs. I looked up and my mother, bloodied and swollen all over, pulled him off, and without so much as cloth nor coin, we left. It was a miserable time after that. The weather was late fall, and friends were scarce. We had made it halfway across the country to the town of Galway. It wasn't nearly as big in those days. However, it was plenty big for what I was used to. We made our home in a small shelter that was neither warm nor clean, and I was no more than a street urchin, and my mother was now a whore. I didn't see her much. She spent most of her time in a warm bedroom with plenty of men, and it made me hate her even more. The days grew shorter, and soon, snow covered the town. It was rare to see my mother, and never during the day. She would come by and bring me crusts of bread and cold broth. I ate. It was nothing like the hot stews we would have in our childhood home. It seemed I was always hungry now. I didn't bathe, and when the itch of my wool coats was compounded with bites of lice and other little bugs, I began to cough. Just an irritation at first, and of course, I had been sick before, but it turned into something much worse. Day by day, I could feel my windpipe tighten, and I tried to cough up the swollen skin, but only blood would produce. I slept a lot more, as it was preferable to the agony of consciousness. But even then, I could still feel the choking, metallic heat that burned inside of me. I fell asleep once more, and I dreamt of my aunts and uncles and every relative that had long since passed, and even met a brother I didn't know I had. That was the last time that I would ever know of such peace and happiness. All at once, I felt myself being yanked back hard, like something pulling me by the scruff of my neck. There was a great gasp as my eyes shot open, and the pain in my body was incredible. The closest I can describe it is the feeling of all my muscles, joints, and tendons cramping together in one great squeeze. Strangled gurgles escaped my throat, though my internal screams were much louder. I felt the muscle in my chest give one final thump, and then nothing. The muscles in my body released as much the same rate as the heat from inside me. I opened my eyes, and everything was as sharp as a bell. In fact, all the pain from my sickness was gone. I could smell and hear things that I had no business smelling and hearing, and I found I was incredibly thirsty. My mother was lying next to me, and her smile went wide, showing teeth that were entirely too sharp. In fact, I felt my own, and they were now indeed long and serrated. I opened my mouth to speak, the first time in weeks I assume, and told her that I needed water. She quickly got up and ran over to a sack on the floor. I sat up, and to my horror, saw that it was moving. She carried it back over and reached in. My unease quickly stopped, with a scent of something hot filled my nose. My thoughts of water vanished as she pulled out a large rat out of the sack. Without even so much as a beat of hesitation, I launched myself at it. My hands squeezed the animal tightly, popping bones as the creature struggled, and I sank my teeth into it. The blood was more filling than any food that I had ever known, and I drained it completely as my mother held me in her lap, gently rocking me. This went on for about a year, and it gave me time to ponder my new existence. I was disgusted, especially with the fact that I had to stick only to animals as my mother instructed. What she did to me was unforgivable, and my hatred for her grew to new heights. After so long on feeding on vermin and farm animals, the smell of living humans was growing overpowering. I finally said to hell with it. It was the stupid cow's fault I lived such a cursed life anyway. I waited until the eventide came upon the land. My mother still hadn't risen yet, and wouldn't for a little while longer. I stalked the country road as a heavy fog rolled in, threatening a large storm nearby, and indeed, the sounds of thunder weren't far off in the distance. A wagon, coming toward the direction of town, announcing itself with a little endeavor to be silent. When I was sure there was no one else nearby, I leapt for the driver. The horses whined and the wagon crashed to a stop, and before the man knew what was happening, half his blood was down my throat. Oh, the taste, this feeling of raw power. I felt strength that I never before knew existed, and I wanted more. My desires were met with the shrill screams coming from inside the cab, and I ripped the door off of it in my euphoric state. The scream reached new heights as I drained the women of their delicious life. It was spicy and rich, and had I the ability, I would surely have wept. I was too inebriated at that time to truly know what I had done. As the feelings of absolute bliss subsided, I looked down to see the mother and 2 young daughters I had just murdered. This was horrid enough. However, to my antipathy, I saw the small shape underneath a slightly red-stained blanket motionless. I cried out to the night in anguish. What had I become? I knelt to the ground screaming, and for too long, a small company of men that rode in on horseback from Galway came upon me. They saw the mess of carnage, and a chase had begun. As impressive as my new speed was, the horses gained quickly. I ran into the empty fog-filled streets, and my mother grabbed hold of me, and we raced to the graveyard that had served as our home. And I began to feel safe. But I was a fool. There was no place to hide and little time. My mother pulled me over to a small tomb, pushed the heavy slab over, and hurried me inside. An age of decay overtook me, and the both rattled beneath my form. I would have resisted had I known what was coming, but in the jumble of confusion, I just watched my mother whisper, "I love you," and she pulled the lid back over me. It was hard to hear, even with my heightened sense. However, I could make out Mother's screams. They were relentless, and after that, nothing. 200 years or so have gone by. I lost track. I write novels to pass the time, but not a night goes by that I don't regret the way I squandered my time with my mother. I am, however, thankful for all that she sacrificed for me, for all the times I have to ask why. The answer is always the same. I do my best to feed upon animals, though I do slip from time to time. The only thing that keeps me on track is the letter that she slipped in with me that horrid night. My dearest Bram, I feared this day would eventually come, so I wanted to have some sort of closure should you ever lose me. I know you hate me for all the things you've had to go through in life, and if I could change them all, I would. You were the only important thing in my life, and I couldn't stand by and watch your father abuse you. I gladly sold my body in return for a safe place for you to stay, as I had nothing else to offer for coin. And when I saw you grow sick and almost die, I had a friend turn you into something else. It was heartbreaking for me to do. However, I couldn't lose you. I changed myself so you wouldn't have to be alone. I also know your anguish of having to feed of animals. I didn't want you to harm another soul. I can't say how it will end, but just know that I will always be there for you in any way possible. If you ever have to ask why, just know that it's because I love you. Please forgive me, my son. Love always, your mom, Charlotte Mathilda. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.